What's poppin', everybody? My name is Paul Esden Jr., a.k.a. Boy Green. I'm the New York Jets digital reporter for Heavy.com. You can read all that fancy stuff below on that fancy-looking graphic. I'm joined, as always, by Randy Mueller, our former NFL general manager, former executive of the year, and you can follow him at that handle below, at Randy Mueller, joining us. And it's Super Bowl week, baby. Randy, how you feeling?
I'm mixed emotions, Paul. I'm all fired up for the Super Bowl, but it's kind of the end. So I'm already preparing myself. But oh, wait, we'll have some XFL action a week from Sunday. So we'll have some football back in our lives. So I'm less sad than I normally am.
Yes, it'll be a nice baton passing. I love how all that's set up, and I'm ready for this iteration of the XFL, and of course your work behind the scenes making that happen. So looking forward to all that. All that football jazz will be lovely. And I think we'll have to start working that into the weekly show. That'd be a lot of fun as well. Everybody, wherever you're watching, feel free to jump into the comment section. We'll try to get in a little bit of mailbag action at some point during today's program. But first, let's dive right into Super Bowl week, and we have the number one seed Philadelphia Eagles against the number one seed Kansas City Chiefs. I mean, the NFL gods couldn't have laid it out any better for us as we dive in here. My big question before we even get to the actual Super Bowl, Randy, is the future of Jalen Hurts. Of course, all the draft picks that are not first rounders have a standard 4-year contract, which means we're getting into extension time a lot quicker for some of these players as opposed to some of the first round players when we're talking 5th-year options and things of that nature. And of course, the talk of the town has been Jalen Hurts' future. What do you do? It's been a bit of a one-year wonder here with Jalen Hurts. He's been spectacular. He's in the MVP conversation. We have the NFL Award Show, of course, tonight. So, Randy, what do you do here with a situation like this where on one hand, it's been a very impressive run, and you could pay him, in theory, proactively by getting that done as soon as possible. But at the same time, you haven't seen a massive sample size that makes you feel good about it. So you could kind of go back and forth here on Jalen Hurts. What say you, Randy?
Well, I think the trend has been going up, Paul, and that's, we've seen how quickly it's gone up this year, but Jalen Hurts, his progression the last 3 years has been unbelievable. And you could really even start from his days at Alabama, going through the Oklahoma stop to the Eagles, and to see where he is now, I see no reason not to try to extend this guy sooner the better. I do think you can beat the curve a little bit. I would surely want to get him done before the Joe Burrow and Justin Herbert deals come in.
Oh boy.
I think they're fighting the clock on those two, and we both know that those are going to come in north of $50 million a year, and in what some would call crazy fashion. So I don't think they're going to have to do that for Jalen. I don't think they have any doubt that he's the guy going forward. So that makes it easier for a front office, for a guy, for Howie Roseman, for them to make the decision. Now it's just a matter of settling on the dollars and where that might come in. And you're right. He's a shorter term deal because he was not a first round pick. He can go to the bank sooner per se. And maybe there is a bridge deal in there that they both work out that gives him lifelong security, but still doesn't commit, to 5-6 years. I don't know how he'll do this, but I think in the end, they're going to want to sign him, and sign him sooner the better.
And Randy, from your perspective, is there any level of hesitation? You did talk about that natural progression that we've seen from Alabama to Oklahoma to the NFL level, and how he kind of worked his way up from backup. Remember, 2nd-round pick behind Carson Wentz, who was the Super Bowl chosen one, while Nick Foles did save the day. But he was supposed to be the guy, played at an MVP level in that season before getting hurt. And then all of a sudden, the baton is eventually passed here to Jalen Hurts. Do you have any level of hesitation from your perspective, from everything that we know, outside looking in, kind of this, front office like perspective on this, that any hesitation on pulling the trigger on what will be, no doubt, a big time quarterback deal?
Yeah, I really don't, Paul. I think the things that have been steady with Jalen the whole time is character, leadership, intangibles. That has been steady. So you know what you're getting. And I think the Eagles even know more than we know on the outside. I don't think this is a guy who's going to be changed by a potload of money. I think his values are well grounded. He's always going to say the right thing and be the face of your franchise. That's not a given in other places. I think sometimes we always, as GMs, would worry about what's going to change with this guy's life if you give him this amount of money. And I don't think they have to worry about that with Jalen. I think they know what they have. He'll be the face, really, of a city. And I think Philadelphia has welcomed him and is all in favor of paying him. So I really don't have doubts. Now, the only doubts I would have can we keep this staff together? Can we keep this system together? We know Nick Sirianni's got a couple assistants that are in high demand around the league. And so we'll see what shakes out there. But I think the groundwork has been laid. The production has been there. I don't see any reason where you wouldn't try to pull the trigger on something that's ahead of the curve, which also, Paul, gives you an idea how to settle your cap and how to plan your cap over the next 4 or 5 years. That was always big for the front office, is you want to be able to plan your cap. And if you have your highest paid guy structured in so you know where those cap numbers are, it's easier to build around him. And so I think they'll want to do it sooner than later so they know what else they have to spend and where they can use draft picks as opposed to any free agents, and really just structure the rest of the pie. He's going to get a bigger portion, no doubt, but they can plan that portion instead of having a kid just scoop a hand out of the pie and not know how much he's getting.
100%. And that's a great way to put it. And you've mentioned that the potential vultures that are kind of, above the surface on the coaching staff, also that way for the players. When I pull up the Eagles 2023 free agents to be, there are some big time names on this list, and I'll drop a few of them in terms of some of their projected money that they've had both from 2022 and moving forward. Fletcher Cox, Robert Quinn, Brandon Graham, Javon Hargrave, Jason Kelsey, James Bradbury. That's just a list off the top of the list, and there's even more names than that go deeper. Some of those guys that Howie was able to get on good deals, like Ndamukong Suh, Linval Joseph, and even deeper, Chauncey Gardner-Johnson, the guy they stole from the New Orleans Saints in the first place, who is set to be a free agent. Interesting they didn't sign him immediately upon that trade, but nonetheless, a lot of big names here. Randy, I ask you, are they going to be able to keep this core together? Because even beyond that, they've had really great roster construction from A to Z, pillar to post, with depth. So maybe they can afford to lose some of these guys, but these are some big star names here, Randy.
It is a fascinating process, having been through it many times myself.
Sure.
I would love to have this task. I think Howie has done a great job and systematically has stuck to his guns. In other words, he hasn't been impulsive to go do something that's going to come back to haunt him. You mentioned a bunch of those names. And the way it works for our listeners is that those names will be on cards on your free agent board, and you will implement them where you feel they are in the big scheme of who else is available. So if you have several cards that come in above, Fletcher Cox, we know his age, you may tend to make a move that is an improvement. If there's no cards above him and everybody you view as valued below him, you're probably going to have to pay him. But that's all information that Howie Roseman and his staff have already. So my guess is they're already planning that. And like I say, I love that part of the job, to be a system and a very process-oriented procedure. And they'll be able to select the players depending on draft, depending on free agents availability around the league, that make them better so that they don't take steps back if some of those guys don't return. And money will dictate it. Money's obviously a big issue there, but you've got to value them as players first and then work the money part in second. So it's a little complicated, but Howie has obviously made a great GM coming from the salary cap side, and I think he handles this stuff as good as anybody in the league.
In other words, Randy, you're saying what the kids are saying. It's a first world problem for Philly as they try to say, what superstar player do we want to bring back with all the other superstar players we have on the team, which is, again, a good problem to have.
I think, Paul, Paul, also remember this, that Howie's not going to be swayed by people like us. He's not going to be swayed by people in the media. You mentioned big names. The fact that a guy is a big name, little name, small name, medium name won't matter. And that's the way you have to do it. You've got to take that part of the equation out. You can't be swayed by this thing called public influence. And so he will value these players. He'll see what his options are, and then he'll make justified business decisions that lead them to really running a fiscally sound operation.
You've piqued my interest, and I want to go into this because I remember Joe Douglas, the New York Jets general manager, also a former Philadelphia Eagles guy, who won a Super Bowl back in 2017, so it all comes back full circle. Is Joe Douglas revealed the process of having people inside his building that when they have a pending free agent, and the name I'll bring up is Robbie Anderson. He was a former undrafted free agent out of Temple that the Jets brought in. And as he was heading towards unrestricted free agency a couple years ago, Joe Douglas in his building have people that are projecting what they believe he will command on the open market, which then, dictates what they believe they're going to try to offer him before he reaches that point. And they try to essentially guess how much he's going to make and then try to make a decision based off of that. And he said, ultimately, Robbie Anderson reached free agency and signed a nice 2-year deal for $20 million with the Carolina Panthers. And then he admitted to the media that I miscalculated, or people miscalculated. The money was higher than we thought it was. And ultimately, it kind of changed the dynamic. Randy, can you take us behind enemy lines here? Bring us inside the building. How do you guys figure out the number? Because it seems like a mythological place where free agency people get overpaid all the time, and you're trying to calculate what other teams are willing to do and what you value the player at as a whole. How do you figure out the money in that? It seems like an inexact science.
I would say this, and at the end of the day, and I'll circle back to this, it's really supply and demand that dictate what a guy's value is. But I do think the information that you speak of that you get from the analytics side, and there's a million of these guys out there in social media now that think they can justify, hey, this guy's this guy's that. It only matters if the value of him as a player matches up. That's the bottom line. You've got to be able to evaluate, you've got to value, and then you got to place it together in the team build. So there's 3 different components that go with it. I don't disagree with what Joe said. I would always want that information. I would take it as a part of the cog, but it's not going to determine at the end of the day how much I pay a guy. It may be a gauge, but like you said, you only need one team to come and say he's worth more, and it blows all of your analytics planning out the window. I think the key is that once you value what a player is to you, that you kind of stick to that process and don't let the interest outside determine what you're going to pay. Because if you don't think Robbie Anderson is worth 20 million, you surely shouldn't do that. But you've also got to have, if you have this information ahead of time, then you can figure out some options. And really making these deals is all about options. So you take all the information that you're talking about, that I'm talking about, plug it in, figure out what your best options are going forward, and then try to make the best deal. You're obviously going to make a worse deal for your team if you have no options. So you're
100%.
Identifying options so that you can make a fiscally sound deal.
Yeah, which is, again, easier said than done, I suppose, when you consider all the factors and all the people that are in your ear, because they're all trying to give you as much information, but ultimately you're the one with the axe, and you have to make those decisions that ultimately, at the end of the day, we either live or die by.
Right. I think a lot of times GMs are swayed by the cap analysts and some of those guys within your own building, when those guys really can't determine value. They can determine it on paper, but I want my value to be determined on the field. This guy's really good. He's really good for us. He fits our system better than the Carolina Panthers. And those kind of questions you really can't get answered by analytics. Those are factual football things that we're going to run this scheme. He's more valuable to us. Those kind of questions. And you have to discuss them internally, because I wouldn't want to block anybody's opinion out. I want all those opinions brought to the table, and then we'll decide what's best for us.
And again, I think that's another part of it that goes beyond the numbers. Again, the intangibles of this or this that, not to generalize, but as Dave Gettleman once called them, the computer nerds in the back of the room, as they're trying to figure out the pieces here, there, and everywhere. Again, it makes it a more complicated beast. Before we move off the Eagles and go to the other side, for all the Kansas City Chiefs fans I see are storming the comments, Arrowhead pride.
Storming the castle? They're storming the castle, Paul?
They certainly are. So before we get there, one more nugget on the Eagles here. What is the storyline you're watching out for? There's, of course, people talk about the Andy Reid Bowl of him facing his old team. There's the Kelsey brothers fighting against one another. What's the one that's titillating your juices here, Randy, ahead of the Super Bowl from the Eagles side of things?
Well, there's 2 things that I have my eye on. One is I have not felt like Jalen Hurts is 100%. And now that's just me. It may not be true.
Sure.
I have felt like there's been hesitation in his game, and I have felt like the Eagles on offense have suffered. I don't think they were the same this last 3 or 4 weeks as they were the first half of the season. So there's some chinks in their armor. It would not shock me if at the end of the season, win or lose, we find out that Jalen Hurts has an injury that requires more treatment and rehab in some fashion, because I just don't think he has been what we had grown accustomed to seeing. Just my gut feeling watching him. Obviously, no doctor. Stated a few Holiday Inns, but no doctor degree. So that's the big one for me. On the other side, it's really, when you're talking about Pat Mahomes and his ankle, he's already showed that he can throw for 300 yards on one leg. He did that last week. So I have a little less concern with him, but the health of these quarterbacks has piqued my interest for sure.
Well, I will say in general, what Patrick Mahomes is doing with one leg is making me question what the heck I'm doing with two legs on most days. But I guess that's neither here nor there.
Yeah.
Thomas, let's jump over to the Kansas City Chiefs side of things as our producer behind the scenes. And really, there's a lot to dig into here. And for the Eagles, it's a different conversation because, again, they had a different version of this Eagles team that made it to a Super Bowl and won a Super Bowl with the Doug Peterson and Nick Foles combination. Now we fast forward a few years later, we have Jalen Hurts and Nick Sirianni. Now we go to the Chiefs side, but they're a different breath of this. They were the promised prince. They were the team that, as soon as Patrick Mahomes originally arrived on the scene a few years ago, won that initial Super Bowl and had the 50 touchdown passes, his first NFL MVP. I imagine he will get another one tonight. And yes, I'm acquiescing to all the Chiefs fans in our comments. You're welcome. I sold out to the man. So go Chiefs. Let's ride, baby. Let's go with all that juicy stuff going on. But I have to say, with that, it seems like they have this destiny promise to live up to because Patrick Mahomes signed this monster forward $50 million deal, and there is something to it. So, Randy, right off the top, and this is a prognostication start to the Super Bowl. How many Super Bowls do you think he ends up with? Because we've heard all kinds of wild numbers. I've had a few people join me on my radio show from Chiefs land saying, "Oh, it's easily going to be 5 or 6." I'm like, "Well, we're only at 1, people. What are we? We're jumping the gun a bit." But Randy, where do you sit in all of this?
Well, he has been to 3, and how old is he now?
Yeah.
Not very old.
Yeah, 27. So, yeah.
I think as long as Andy Reid wants to coach and be at the helm, the steadiness of the ship will always be there. I think Pat Mahomes, if all the GMs right now did a survey and got to pick whoever they wanted to start a franchise, 30 out of 32 would pick Pat Mahomes. That's how unanimous it is. And that's how special this kid is. If you sit down and look at the all-time list of quarterbacks, and I kind of did this exercise the other day. I've been watching ball a long time and been involved in the NFL for 40 years. I have seen very few that can do what Pat Mahomes can do. And therefore, I think he will go down as one of the all-time greats. And that may include him being in the top 4 or 5 of all time. So it would not shock me to see him win 3 or 4 Super Bowls. I don't know if anybody will ever catch the Tom Brady numbers, but if he wins 3 or 4 Super Bowls, that puts him in some pretty elite company and probably more accoladed than everybody in the game except Tom Brady. But I think that is a possible for this guy. It's hard to affix that kind of expectation to a young kid, and I still consider him young, but I think this system works for him. They've got rid of their best receiver, and they're still back again. The schemes work for him, and he's going to get nothing but better. He understands now more of the process of what they're doing on offense than he did a year ago. He's only going to get better at this job. So I don't see why he can't do it another 8 or 10 years at the highest level. And I think he'll get to another 3 or 4 Super Bowls. So he could easily win 4 or 5. I don't doubt that at all.
And Randy, you did that poll and said maybe 30 of 32 teams would pick Patrick Mahomes. I did my own poll just now, and I thought 33 of 32 teams would pick Patrick Mahomes based on the people I just made up and talked to. So that in its own right. But the Tyreek Hill thing, I have to dive into because I'm going to be honest. I've admitted it on past shows. It's the biggest L take I've perhaps ever had in my history on the planet. When the Chiefs lost Tyreek Hill, I said, "Oh boy, Patrick Mahomes' Chiefs team is going to have to figure it out a different way." I think this is going to be a massive hit. They have no idea with the dynamics that Tyreek Hill brings to the table and the elite speed the defense have had to account for, which opens up everything else for everybody else. I'm like, man, Patrick Mahomes, they're about to have a reality check. Check slapped me in the face that they're in the Super Bowl right now, and they look even crazier, which leads me to my question for you, Randy. And this seems wild to even say, but are the Chiefs more dangerous as an offense without Tyreek Hill than what they were with Tyreek Hill?
I think they're more diverse. I do think that. Now, the running back Pacheco has made them a little more dynamic because he's got some juice. He can score from anywhere on the field. He makes them a little different. But I do think they have to be more true to the system, more true to the scheme, and they don't get bailed out as much. Mahomes would move around, and at the last second, Tyreek Hill breaks free, and he can always just heave it up to him. He didn't have that luxury this year. But having said that, the Chiefs still have some guys that can run. And the idea is almost as much as it's Tyreek Hill, it's the element of speed. And Tyreek's the fastest. I give him credit for that. But they've taken a slight step back in the group that they have now, can still take the top off defenses, can still force teams to play you different coverages and be aware of that, which helps the running game just as much. So I don't think they may have given up the best player, but the concept of speed still exists with the Chiefs, and I think it always will. They just weren't willing to pay $25 million a year for that particular guy. They don't feel like they had a $10 million drop off by signing the guys they have and kind of reconstructing that crew. Plus, it's, I think, also made Pat Mahomes even more sharp in his reads, in his processing, in everything, because he's got to do it, really refine it with painstaking detail. And I think he's done that instead of just heaving it up to Tyreek sometimes. So I think it's made them better for sure.
Well, let's get into Andy Reid. We were doing some long-term prognosis here on Patrick Mahomes. What about Andy Reid? This is a guy who obviously went to 5 NFC Championship games for the Eagles, including a Super Bowl trip, and they were this close with old T.O. coming out of nowhere and looking like the most dominant player on that football field. Of course, what he's done with the Kansas City Chiefs, which he joined that team back in 2013, and people forget what he did in the 90s with the Green Bay Packers as both their offensive line and tight ends coach, and then eventually quarterback and assistant head coach as well. Where does he rank among the best head coaches of all time here, Randy?
Well, he's clearly a Hall of Fame guy right now in my mind. His bio, his list of accomplishments puts him in rarefied air, I think, already. And to do this with 2 teams really sets him back. But you're probably talking about an all-time 6 or 8, in the business coach. His numbers speak for it. His longevity speaks for it. The fact that he's done it in multiple cities now speaks to the, size of the task. I would not be, again, this is all conjecture and us just kind of putting our own spin on it. But for me, he'd be a top 5 or 6 NFL head coach without a doubt. And I think he is, I always laughed about this because I was in Seattle with Mike Holmgren when he came from Green Bay.
Yes.
And Andy went to Philadelphia the same year that Mike came to Seattle. So they kind of spun off then, but you talk about Mike Holmgren, like Andy Reid in every way is little Mike Holmgren, or was back at that day.
That's amazing.
So he's learned from the best. He's changed enough of the way Mike in that West Coast offense had evolved to put his own spin on it. And then every year it seems like he formulates a little different plan, some different quirks. A lot of times the same old stuff doesn't work, but they've been able to, in Kansas City, keep things fresh and keep defenses guessing. That is a trait that's not easily done by head coaches and by coaches in our league. And I think Andy's done that as well. So no question, an all-timer. Plus he's an all-time good guy and a good person. So he's easy to root for.
Well, that's amazing. And for those who are counting at home, he has 2 Super Bowl rings on his finger. Of course, the Chiefs, which we mentioned a couple of years ago, but also he was an assistant coach for Super Bowl 31, baby. That was that great Green Bay Packers, New England Patriots Super Bowl. He was, of course, on that staff, Brett Favre, and all those wonderful memories as well. So I ask you this, Randy, what would a 3rd Super Bowl ring for him mean? You just talked about his legacy. If he wins this one on Sunday, how much higher can he climb? Or is his legacy and everything kind of already solidified, and it's just kind of water buckets in the ocean as it is perceived with additional Super Bowl championships?
Well, I think his legacy is secure. I don't doubt that. I think there's only maybe 1 or 2 guys that he's chasing even at this point. And I don't know if anybody will ever get to the Belichick numbers. Others have won 2. But you get to that 2 and 3 area, you're rarefied, and that's as good as it gets. They start to name awards after you when you win 3, Paul. So there'll be some coaching award that is tied to Andy's name in the future if he wins 3 Super Bowls.
And let's go to the other side. We mentioned this for the Philadelphia Eagles side. There's a lot of sexy, kind of storylines here on the Chiefs side of things. Again, of course, Patrick Mahomes trying to go from ring number 1 to ring number 2, and that's rarefied air in its own right, because we had the Marino conversations for people that don't have any rings but perform very well. 1 ring, Drew Brees, obviously, is a part of that conversation. But to get to the 2, Eli Manning, Peyton Manning, quarterbacks that changed their own legacy and perceptions, getting an additional Super Bowl championship here. So there's certainly that from the Patrick Mahomes sides and the Chiefs side, but so many more as well with Travis Kelce and all these talented players in this game. What are the storylines that stick out to you from a Chiefs kingdom perspective?
Well, I think the big thing for the Chiefs is, and these 2 teams haven't played this year, but they played a year ago in what was really a whitewashing by Kansas City. I mean, Pat Mahomes threw 5 touchdowns. Tyreek Hill was the star of the game. He caught, I think, 170, 180 yards worth. So it was a wax out. I think the Chiefs scored on almost every possession. So they've got to find a way to rekindle that, whatever it was that worked in X's and O's, but yet still make enough changes to where they can keep the Eagles, off guard. I think for me, the Chiefs defense does hold the key in that it's a different game if the Chiefs can get ahead because their defense can play a different style. Most of the Eagles' wins this year come from jumping out and scoring on the first series and then keeping things close to the vest the way the rest of the game goes. I would be anxious to see if the Chiefs somehow can get out ahead, what that does to the Eagles, because I think the Chiefs defense then plays a little better, a little different. And I think the Eagles offense is operating not quite as high octane if they have to throw the ball all the time. Because let's face it, they don't want to. They want to run the ball. Not that their passing game is archaic. It's not. But they want to be able to run the ball. And if you get behind, especially by 2 scores, it's not as easy to run the ball and have the patience that they've had and shown all year long.
100%, and that's an astute observation because the Eagles, and I saw Field Yates, who does fantastic work for ESPN, he shared this nugget that both the Chiefs and Eagles combined with their sacks. This is the most sacks from a defensive perspective combined between 2 teams in the Super Bowl era. And when you consider the Eagles' strategy is getting off to these leads, imposing their run game because they're allowed to be able to do that, and the situational passes with all these wonderful players like Devontae Smith and A.J. Brown and others, and Dallas Goedert and so many other pieces to the puzzle. But also on the other side, when they know the other team has to pass to get back into it, all those wonderful pass rushers and that deep defensive line rotation J.J. Watt called perhaps one of the best he's ever seen, all of a sudden they can go off. But if it's reversed and all of a sudden they can't just do that, they got to start defending the run a little bit more and doing some other things. It could put them on their heels a little bit. So it's a really interesting point there, Randy.
I think the first quarter of this game will be as telling of any Super Bowl, just based on that alone. I think the fact that the Eagles have so many sacks, 70 sacks for the season? Yes. I mean, they've doubled a bunch of teams. It's incredible. But they're always sacking the quarterback from ahead. They're always ahead in the game. They're always pinning their ears back, and they're coming. And nobody's made them pay, and nobody's really come back on them. I think the Chiefs, 1, could make them pay if they come hard, and they'll find a weakness in the back end. But 2, if the Chiefs can get ahead, it's not going to be easy for the Eagles to keep rushing the passer. They're going to have to systematically change a little bit the way they've defended these first 20 weeks of their season.
Well, let's stay inside the AFC West. Let's go to the Denver Broncos, who made a lot of headlines coming up this week with their dramatic trade and record-breaking signing of a monster contract to acquire Sean Payton and bring him into the mix, which is very interesting. And I think a lot of people are asking the question, Randy, what's next for the Broncos and how will they proceed with this new coach in the building? And you talked about your prior work, of course, with George Patton on top of the Denver Broncos organization as well. What's next for this team now that they've gotten their sexy head coach hire?
Well, I applaud him on making the deal for Sean Payton because I think that was the one deal that they had to make. Sean was the only guy that could walk in that door and be in charge without having to demand being in charge. He has the cachet. He has the skins on the wall. Nobody can really say this is still Russell Wilson's team because it's really not. Sean Payton will be the big show, and he will get all of the credit and all of the blame, and that's the way it should be. I think that part of it's good. I've been in offices before where we've hired a head coach. The biggest job is getting him up to speed. It's really time is of the essence. Not only does he have to hire the rest of his staff, but you've got to bring him in and get him up to speed on all the medical information, everything to do with your team. You'll do a thorough medical review. You'll do a thorough cap review. I would want our coach to be updated on all that stuff because all this adds into making decisions on players and the team build in a big picture. So they're doing that right now, I can assure you. The other thing they've really got to do, Paul, is they've got to define the criteria for how they develop players. They've got to not only develop them, but how do they identify them? So we're going to need to know what we're going to do on offense and what we're going to ask each position to do. And not only that, you're going to have to do the same thing on defense. And that's not an easy task because schemes are changing between staffs. Personnel will change between staffs. So we got to figure out, do we have the guys that fit with what we're going to do now, or do we need to replace a few? And that transition needs to get going as early as we can as well, because you've got to marriage it with free agency and the draft. But first off, we've got to write the job descriptions. We've got to know what we need from these players. And it seems like a obvious task, but it's not quite as obvious because it takes time to sort out. And actually, you'll discuss this ad nauseum inside NFL buildings. And I know that's what Denver's doing right now. So it's a fun time. It's new energy. It's a new leader. I've always, enjoyed my stint getting behind a new coach and being aligned and hearing his philosophy. And then I'll go find the players if you tell me what you want to do. And I think that's probably what you find in George Payton, who's really a good mix for Sean Payton. George is one of those guys that doesn't have an ego, not going to insert his personality, going to be fine taking the lead from the coach. And I think that's a good setup, and probably couldn't find a better guy to work with. Sean couldn't than George. So that'll be a good setup for them, but they've got to communicate and communicate and communicate over the next couple of weeks, because free agency is going to be here before you know it.
And again, you speak to that Sean Payton flex when he comes in the building, that this isn't Russell Wilson's team, this is Sean Payton, which brings us to that interesting audio clip that certainly made its way around when Sean Payton is doing a impromptu media session with media reporters all surrounding him. They brought up the fact that Russell Wilson had coaches in the building under Nathaniel Hackett, his own people inside the building, and Sean Payton called that a foreign concept, and that's not going to happen around here, and that he hadn't really heard of it. It also harkened me back to the New England Patriots. I remember Bill Belichick was not a big fan when Tom Brady had Guerrero inside the building, a part of his own personal team. That rubbed Belichick the wrong way, and eventually he threw Guerrero out of the building, said, sorry, this ain't happening. This is my ship. I'm the captain now, in the line there from the famous Tom Hanks movie, and to bring that into the mix. So were you surprised at all about that? Or because, again, Sean Payton comes from the Bill Parcells tree, and we all know those kind of guys that come from the Bill Parcells regime, especially here in New York after all those years.
Well, it was one of the reasons that I thought Sean was the right guy for this job, because you needed someone to walk in the building with that kind of swag, with that kind of cachet, like you say. He wasn't going to have to take no for an answer. Here's what we're going to do, Russell. This team had turned the whole franchise over to Russell Wilson last year. He had, like you say, coaches in the office. He had extra parking spots. I'm sure he has extra lockers, the whole bit, right? It was kind of the NBA way of adapting player empowerment. It failed miserably, and he failed miserably. There's no way they could run it back in any fashion or form. They had to pick a different lane. And Sean Payton was the one guy who could pick a different lane without a doubt and get everything back to normal. And I think that's what we're seeing. So I was not surprised that he put the kibosh on all that stuff. I think it's normal to do that. He also said, hey, you're going to get your instruction. He was telling the media this. We have plenty of coaches. We have plenty of instruction generated by us. We don't need any outside information seeping into our building, much less having offices in our building. So I think that will be cleaned up. It will be more traditional, and Sean Payton will be running the show along with his coaches.
So with that being said, again, Sean Payton comes in. He's got obviously an impressive resume, including a Super Bowl championship. He's got a Super Bowl ring on his finger, obviously, from what they were able to accomplish with the New Orleans Saints. How long do you think it's going to take for the Broncos to be able to turn this around? They had a remarkable defense, of course, last year, and Sean Payton is this offensive wizard. So if he could bring that piece to the puzzle, you'd think that they could have a pretty good team. It's an incredibly tough division, of course. Chiefs, obviously, they're in the Super Bowl as part of that division, and the team you got on your hoodie there, Justin Justin Herbert, of course, he's looking pretty good with the Chargers as well. So how quickly can they turn this thing around realistically?
Well, I would not put anything past a Sean Payton-led group, that's for sure. I think the other thing that I heard him say in the press conference to kind of give us an indicator is that we're going to do things that Russell Wilson can do. We're going to tailor the offense around his strengths. But I would only push back this way. Don't you think the other guys did that too? I know the last two coordinators that he had in Seattle tried to do that too. So this will be system 4 for Russell in 4 years, and the results really haven't varied. So that's still the key to me, is how much more can we prop Russell up? I haven't seen the indicators that are going to make us think that we have the Russell Wilson of 5 years ago. It just hasn't been there. And it wasn't just last year. So it's been a last year and a half in Seattle. So it's been 2 or 3 years now since we've seen Russell Wilson. So I think that's a big part of it. The other thing is they got slapped around last year, and it wasn't all on Russell. This roster wasn't what all of us in the media thought it was when the season started. We thought they were all going to be able to compete. We knew the new coach last year which was somewhat of a question mark, but I don't think this roster played up to expectations either. So they're going to have to tinker with it. They're not going to have a lot of draft picks, obviously, because they've given those all away. They're going to have very little cap room. But I think what's going to have to be redefined, and we spoke on this earlier, is they're going to have to identify some young ascending talent that they can somehow get away from other teams that end up coming here and producing. So it's going to test George Payton's evaluative skills and his staff. And they've got to find, in my opinion, 2 or 3 guys that we may not have heard of that are the third linebacker with the Chiefs, or the fifth corner with the Chargers, or somebody that we really know that for whatever reason hasn't gotten an opportunity where they're at. We've all done that in our career as GMs. We found some rubies in the rough, and we've got to bring them in and shine them up. That's the kind of additions the Broncos are going to have to make, whether it's somebody that Sean coached in the past or somebody that a staff member who he ends up hiring has under their wing that was with them somewhere else. They're going to have to be very innovative in how they add talent, because they don't have a lot of money and they have no draft picks. That'll be the key for me, as to if they can get better or not, because they've got to get better in some other areas.
And a creative way to do that, if you don't have a lot of coin in the purse to be able to buy some of those free agents and new pieces, is looking at some of those, perhaps, to use your word, hidden rubies on the team, like Javonte Williams, who went down. Can you bring him back? He was a impressive talent out of North Carolina. Jerry Jeudy was supposed to take this massive next leap. That did not happen. Cortland Sutton is a very talented player. KJ Hamler, you start going down this roster, there's hidden talent there that wasn't able to be maximized, and maybe the Sean Payton offensive wizardry could certainly take it to that level. So that is all possible. And everybody that is watching the show right now, let's show some friggin' support for this baby. Make sure you like the video, hit subscribe wherever you guys are watching. You can follow at Randy Mueller below, our former NFL general manager and, of course, former executive of the year, and at Boy Green 25 if you'd like. Throw that in the mix. We are looking for mailbag questions. Feel free to get involved wherever. We are streaming live in multiple different places. The Super Bowl is, of course, there to be had, or any kinds of questions, anything NFL, feel free, or outside of there, for that matter, and feel free to throw that into the mix, and we'll try to work that into the show as well, because we're going to be diving into here some Super Bowl prop bets. We're going to be getting crazy. Hey, gambling is a part of the new world order, of course, with everything that's going on. So we'll go with some of the best prop bets. And there are some of the simple ones that we talk about, with this team scoring this or over under on this, but we're going to get a little funky here, Randy. We're going to throw some crazy ones at you and try to see how you're able to respond to some of these things going on, and whether people are going to be throwing their money on it. And one of my favorites every year is this weird one, which is the Gatorade shower for the winning coach. It is tradition, of course, for the winning Super Bowl coach to be poured and rained upon with Gatorade, and the betting is on for the color of liquid that will be dumped on the winning coach. Right now, for those wondering, the favorite is orange at plus 250. We have a yellow green at plus 350, and then we start getting into all the crazy territory of clear water, blue, red, pink, purple, or no Gatorade poured whatsoever, which is a nice sneaky bet at plus 1600, if apparently it's some other liquid that could potentially be dumped on the head coach. Randy, first off, do you have any lean here? Is there any inside scoops we could try to go to on the color liquid? Does it affect the team? Is it like Chiefs are red and Eagles are this green? What's the insight here? This is the most pressing question we've asked you on this show in the history of this program.
Yeah, it keeps me awake at night too. I can tell. I'm glad I had a chance to think through this, because it's absolutely no effect at all, whatsoever, Paul. Sorry. It is completely by chance, but it did make me think back to my ball boy days, and when we had to mix the Gatorade, right? I'm going old school here. We used to have to mix these big coolers of Gatorade, and we always used that lime yellowish. That was the original Gatorade. So I'm going with the original yellow, which is the second betting favorite that you chose. So we're not betting the chalk. We're going to win a little money here by dropping the odds down a little bit. And I think it's going to be that, what is it? Kind of a sea green, yellowish, not boy green, but yellowish green, you know? Yeah.
Yes, I love that as well. Okay, let's keep getting funky. We'll throw a couple more at you guys. And what will be mentioned first during the Super Bowl MVP speech? Because, and it's not in here anymore, but I remember the old school days of everyone saying, I'm going to Disney. That used to always be a classic. It didn't even make it on the betting odds. There's teammates is the betting favorites. We have the city and the fans. God, religion could be in the mix. Family, coaches, and team owner at plus 2,500, which is juicy. But I think that'd have to be a special situation to warrant something of that magnitude. Where are we leaning there, Randy? There's a lot of different variety in the diet, you could say, for the who gets thanked first. What is the first thing mentioned in the Super Bowl MVP speech?
Well, think about it. If it's Pat Mahomes, what's he going to
Yeah.
mention first? He's probably going
Oh,
to mention
team.
that
Yeah.
offensive line right away.
Ooh,
And
I
so
like
I
that.
think the
Yeah.
mention of the offensive line is going to be in there, and
Hmm.
I'm considering that. And Andy
Yeah.
Reid in his game plan, that's just the
Mm.
team oriented Pat Mahomes. So I don't know if those things are in there, but those would be
Yeah.
topics that I would bet on for sure. Thinking that Pat Mahomes would be the MVP.
Okay, I'm going to go there, Randy. Let's make us all some money here. I think we're going to go with what you just said. I think it's going to be coaches, which is plus
Yeah.
1,200 on the Sporting News website we're currently on, because the Andy Reid Bowl, it would make a lot of
Yeah.
sense for, let's say, Patrick Mahomes. If they win this thing, he goes, well, Andy Reid, this one's for Andy. Not quite John Elway. This one's for John. I don't know if we're going to get quite that dramatic at the end of the 90s,
Yeah,
getting
I
that
remember it. I
from
remember it
the
well. Yep.
Broncos ownership group. But,
Yep.
I think we could get a little bit of that for Andy. So that could be sneaky. Plus 1,200. That's pretty good money, people. If
Hey.
we're looking to make some scratch out there, that could be nice.
I like it. I like it. I think you're right. And I think that is a way to make it kind of fun at the end of the game, win or lose.
And let me ask you this, Randy. It's not even in our notes, but it just jumped to the top of the head for a lot of people. And I know there's a lot of people because I do sports talk radio on top of doing all our wonderful work here with Heavy. And people that are casual fans will sometimes just watch the Super Bowl for the commercials. There's a lot of people that don't watch football all year long, and they're just in there for the commercials. Randy, I know most of the time you've been working on actual football instead of perhaps paying attention to the commercials, but do you have a favorite Super Bowl commercial that jumps out to you? Do you like simple? Do you like creative? Do you like complex? Do you like music inspired? What are you looking for here when what's the number one thing? What's on the top of the Randy priority list when we're evaluating Super Bowl commercials?
I actually like the commercials, Paul, and I watch them all. I think they're fascinating. But I like the complex ones. I like the ones that might involve 4 or 5 different celebrities, and they're all sitting around the couch in a Friends fashion. I like I like it to be complex and layered. I don't like the simple ones. I love it when you have to think through that a little bit. What did they just say? And you got to rewind it to actually say what was said. The quirkiness, the comedy that's involved, kind of off the cuff. I'm all for looking for something a little different. I'm not an animated guy. I don't like the animated commercials, not necessarily the animal commercials either. I like the Hollywood version of Knives Out, where there's a whole bunch of stars, whole bunch of stars,
great.
And they're all kind of going back and forth in a room, and you got to think about, was that who I thought it was? Was that who I thought it was? Yeah, that kind of stuff. So that's what I'm looking for.
I love that. I will say, historically speaking, I'm a simple animal, and I am entertained by the simple things. Terry Tate, office linebacker, the former Reebok commercial of him lighting up people in the office for throwing something in the recycling as opposed to throwing it in the trash and keeping people in line. And then getting some of the celebrities in there. Our office productivity is up 300% since we brought Terry Tate into the building. I wish I could have 100 Terry Tates in our office. That for me always wins for sure. And I'm seeing some other people in here with Budweiser and the Doritos commercials and some of the other examples that are certainly coming to the mix. But I love it. It makes I never get off the couch. I can't. Someone else is going to have to start bringing me the food or drink. When am I leaving? We have Rihanna, of course. I love Rihanna.
Give me the bad news. That's right. That's all good.
100%. All right, everybody, let's do a little mailbag here. We have our producer, Thomas, behind the scenes, who's done wonderful work here, throwing questions up. Here we go from Matthias Simon. Of course, we got to get our Jets questions in. How could we not, of course, on our YouTube channel? Appreciate it, Matthias. Any dirt on what quarterback the Jets are getting? Randy, give us some scoop here. Everyone's wondering about the gosh darn Jets quarterback situation. Who are they going to get? They're going big name hunting. Are they going to land one of those? Is it going to be a lesser option? What do you believe, Randy?
I think it's going to be a hard sell, and I know Jets fans don't want to hear that. I don't want to be throwing the cold water on the fire here, but I think it's going to be a hard sell to get someone to come there. Everybody knows where Zach Wilson was drafted. We understand that he struggled to this point, but I think if you're going to get a guy to come there, it's going to be hard unless you just blow him out of the water with money that he can't say no to. I don't know that the Jets will do that. I still think that that's going to be a hard chair to fill with Zach in the building. So, I mean, you tell me. I don't think it's Derek Carr's not going there. Aaron Rodgers isn't going there. They don't have enough skins on the wall to acquire an Aaron Rodgers right now where he thinks, this is the place. Aaron Rodgers is going to want to go somewhere he thinks can win it all right now. So I don't know who they're going to get. I really don't. Maybe it's it's a second tiered guy that they pay as a first tier guy. Who that is, Paul, I don't know. I don't think they can draft one that's going to put pressure on Zach Wilson at all. So I don't know that that's going to fit. I just think it's going to be a hard chair to fill. And I know the owner has said, hey, we're going to be big game hunting. We're going to do this. And all the fans are on board. I just think that's easier said than done, even in a market like we're going to see this year. Unless it's somebody like Lamar Jackson who they can trade for, or somebody like that who is coming and we can overpay to get him. Maybe something like that.
I will say I've got a person in New Orleans. They texted me earlier today and told me that Derek Carr was coming back to the facilities for an additional visit. Again, he was visiting with the organization yesterday. I had a late dinner before leaving at about 10:30 or 11 o'clock last night. I heard that he's coming back to the facilities today. So things could be moving and grooving there. So it seems like a Derek Carr decision could be coming. Obviously, we have the deadline coming up on February 15th, which is next Wednesday, in terms of the guarantee and the contract, whether he is cut or traded. There's been a little bit of heat in terms of that from the Saints side of things. So that could be possible as well. So TBD, we'll see. I don't know. For me, I'm a glass half full kind of guy.
I hear you.
In the world of things, I tell people this when we do some of the seminars at colleges and things, that you don't get to pick the hand you're dealt in life, but you can control how you react to the hand that you're dealt. So I've always been a glass half full guy by nature, and that's how I try to appreciate. So of course, Aaron, gosh darn Rodgers, baby, I use the platform. Let's get on here. Let's do the Brett Favre thing, but you can do it even better. Let's make it happen. I'm all aboard the A-Rod to Jets train.
I got you.
So yes, let's speak that into existence. But great question, Matthias. So here we have a couple more. So let's go them in here. MM Morris is one on our YouTube channel. Number one offensive line versus number two offensive line Super Bowl. Is that telling? Because again, obviously the Eagles offensive line is spectacular. They've got so many stars on this group, and the depth has been really nice as well. And then the Chiefs as well have been getting some stuff done. Think about all the hits they've had from a young player perspective: Creed Humphrey, Trey Smith, and making those hits, just to name a few, on top of obviously they paid big money for Orlando coming over from Baltimore. But yeah, is that telling, Randy? I'll throw it to you.
100% telling. I think it shows that you'd have to build from within, and you've got to build that group up. I think it's no secret that the best offensive lines, and I agree with the question, those are the best, and everybody should build that way. It's interesting how they've built them. They've built them a little different. They've done some by paying tackles. They've done some by paying and spending high picks on players. And I think the Eagles have really developed some players, which I think is a telling story for coaches, especially on the offensive side. I think the Eagles maybe are built for a little longer haul. I don't know that Orlando Brown is going to be the guy in the future. I think if I had to pick between the two groups, I would probably pick the Eagles offensive group as a whole. And I agree with you. A couple of these young guys are really good players and they hit on them. So time will tell. But no, if you have a good offensive line and if you have a deep offensive line and can withstand injuries, you're going to have a very good chance to succeed. And teams should try to shore up that as much as they can every year.
And by the way, that's also the key. I know we have to get to another question here, but that's the key. Trey Smith in the 6th round, that level of cheap salary for multiple years. Creed Humphrey, post round 1, hitting on this. And that's why the Chiefs winning as many Super Bowls as you can. Because first off, you never know how often you could get back. So you have to take advantage of every year. But that's a big key of maximizing those cheap windows.
You're not paying big money for those acquisitions, no doubt.
Right. 100%. I believe we have one more question here. All right. We have Michael Palermo on our YouTube channel. Thanks, Michael, for supporting the show. Could a 3-way trade go down between the Raiders, Jets, and Packers? And I've heard this kind of chatter before, not specifically with this question, but if, Aaron Rodgers is interested in potentially falling to Vegas with the Josh McDaniels connection, spoke with Peter Bukowski on my channel for that. Shameless plug, wink, from the Green Bay Packers. So he talked about that connection with Josh McDaniels, and apparently, according to Peter, Aaron Rodgers wanted Josh McDaniels to replace Mike McCarthy when he was fired. Instead, they went with Matt LaFleur. So there's that connection that maybe some people aren't aware of. And there's Derek Carr obviously hanging in the mix. So there's a lot of variables here, a lot of moving pieces, but there may be something to what Michael's saying here with a potential 3-team trade. Could you? I know that doesn't happen as much in the NFL as it does with the NBA, as we just experienced the NBA trade deadline today. But could you potentially see that happen, Randy?
I think it's a little bit of a reach. I don't know that that's the case. I still don't believe Derek Carr is going to get traded. I think it was nice of the Raiders to allow him to go talk to the Saints and work out his free agent contract when they cut him. So why would Derek Carr want to be traded, and have his team that he's going to give something up? I don't know. Three-way deals in the NBA seem to happen, in my opinion, a lot because of cap and because of the maneuvering of cap. We don't see quite that level of cap manipulation in the NFL. We have fewer things that you can consider when you value caps. So those are it's more of a solid cap. You can't go over for any reason. But I think that would be a little bit of a reach. I do think Aaron Rodgers will come west. By the way, is Tennessee west of Green Bay? Well, maybe not, but let's just say west of Tennessee. And yes. And I don't know where Derek Carr is going to go, but I don't really see a three-way trade being made here. You're right. They've happened occasionally, but they're remote in the NFL.
100%. And I will say this, I think really what happened here is I think a lot of people believe now this Derek Carr Saints trade is going to happen. But the only thing I have to say is I believe what ultimately the Saints did, and very smart, again, they got that Mickey Loomis guy down there, is that he goes to the Raiders and say, hey, Raiders, we're thinking maybe this. And the Raiders are like, maybe this. So like, okay, if we decide that a trade is possible, we'll do that. Right. Only to get the head start on free agent conversations with Derek Carr. And now they're having him in his facilities. It's a brilliant move, quite frankly, from Mickey. What's the rub? There's no guarantee that a trade will happen, but a potential trade, like maybe, I don't know. We need to have him in our facilities and talk to him first to see if it's possible. And they can have a huge head start on the rest of the market because when he's eventually cut next week, they, in theory, would be first in line with the Dennis Allen connection, everything else. I think it was actually brilliant. I think that's the real thing, Randy.
I totally agree 100%. And I think that's what's happening. I think the Raiders might be getting played a little bit, just my opinion. Maybe we can talk to Mickey and maybe we can get you an interview as the assistant GM down in Saintsville, because those all make sense to me, Paul. Those are really good points. And I think point right on.
All right. Phone vibrate. Looking forward to that, Mickey. Shout out there from your good old buddy, Randy Mueller. But let's wrap up the show with this, Randy. Emptying the GM notebook. It's one of my favorite segments each week. For those who don't know, it's a random quick-hitting nuggets we didn't cover that may have caught Randy's eye this past week. And there's a variety of topics here. And, well, we already kind of just talked about it there with the Derek Carr Saints thing. But is there anything we missed on that conversation we didn't address, Randy?
No, I think you hit the nail on the head. I think that negotiation is more than just about a trade. And if it were to work out to where the Saints gave a late round pick or something just so the Raiders could save face, maybe that's the way that happens. But there sure isn't going to be a lot of compensation involved if that takes place. So I think they're finding out if they're a good match for each other. And we'll know that obviously before the 15th, which would you say is next Wednesday or Thursday? So
correct.
Yeah. That's when that'll happen. A couple of the other things that struck my eye in the GM notebook, and just tongue in cheek, is Aaron Rodgers really going to have a 4-day darkness isolation retreat? I mean, come on, Paul, seriously? Can I sign up for that too? I'd like to get 4 days of sleeping in a cave somewhere too. And maybe that'll make me smarter. I don't know. I had not heard that before, and I'm not poking fun at it, but where I come from, 4 days, that means we're going hunting for 4 days in the mountains. So I don't know. I don't know what an isolation retreat is. You're going to have to help me with that.
Yeah, I have never heard of that until now, but apparently he's going to be locked in what is supposed to be I was doing some research into these, never thought I'd check that off the bucket list, but here we are, is these dark houses where there's no music, no interaction, no people, but it's almost like a prison where there are slots for food that someone will slide in a tray to you so you can eat, and apparently there's a bathroom somewhere in there. I guess it's kind of like me in the middle of the night stumbling to find it. I guess that will be the same for Aaron Rodgers.
That sounds like a real blast.
Which it does. But here's the real thing to the rest of the NFL people that may mind. Aaron Rodgers on the Pat McAfee show this week ahead of the Super Bowl said he is anticipating doing this 4-day retreat in quote unquote a couple of weeks. If Derek Carr's situation is being figured out February 15th, we have the new league year and legal tampering period in the March 13th to 15th ballpark. If he's not even going on this 4-day retreat to find himself, to understand whether or not he wants to play football next season, we're talking about, I don't know, late February, early March, where a lot of teams in theory that may be interested in Aaron Rodgers have to be on hold, which makes this a lot more complicated in some teams' potential pursuits. Cough, cough. Maybe the Jets hat I'm wearing right now could complicate their matters, because if you wait for Aaron Rodgers, maybe you miss out on some of the other quarterback options.
I guess he's holding more than one team hostage, and that's a red flag if you're me. I surely don't want this trolling philosophy to happen every year. And I'm sure the Packers are tired of it too. So you're right. Timing is everything. And it does show a lot that if he's willing to go do this in a week or two, he's kind of putting the rest of the world on hold. I think he actually loves that. That's his style of leading,
Right.
his style of trolling the rest of us. I would not want to be the Green Bay Packers and Brian Gutekunst having to wait on any decisions. And it affects your compensation packages too. Because the one thing I would be worried about if I'm going to trade for Aaron Rodgers is how long does he want to play? I don't think for a minute he's going to retire. I didn't sound like a guy that's going to retire. I think that's part of his shtick, so to speak. But I do want to know how long he's going to play. But I'm not going to give up a first-round pick if the guy's going to play 1 year. So the Packers need to know that part of it for sure. And maybe Aaron has already told them that and the rest of this for show. I don't know. But it's concerning nonetheless.
Speaking of trolling, I have to ask Randy, this other nugget that you have in your GM notebook here on the Washington Commanders. Ron Rivera came out this week during Super Bowl week and said, Sam Howell is our QB1. And then I had to immediately say, oh, okay, I maybe I wasn't watching enough Washington Commanders football this year, because I'm like, Sam Howell, maybe he played a lot more games than I thought. Then I saw, he played one game this year, and now he's the clear QB1. What the hell's going on here, Randy?
Yeah, that caught my eye for sure. I thought, first thing I thought was, this can't be serious. Is it April Fool's? I mean, Sam Howell, and I'm not disparaging Sam Howell. He was a 5th-round draft pick, had a nice college career at North Carolina. I get it. Mm-hmm. There is no way you can say that I saw enough in this game that I can make him the starting quarterback. Now, what I think Ron might be referring to is that maybe he's the quarterback one when the offseason starts. Okay. That's great, but that's a long ways from actually being quarterback one. So I think it would be malpractice by a front office to make this declaration and stick with it and really believe it. And even if you did, you'd never say that. So I don't know what purpose we're serving by saying something like that. That would concern me if my coach was talking like that. We clearly know the Commanders have to get better in a lot of ways, including at the quarterback position. I don't think you could ever hitch your giddy up to a 5th-round pick who's played one game and say we're good enough at that position. That would concern me if I was a Commander fan.
Yeah, that seems bizarre. He also, in the same breath, said that they will not be pursuing other big-name, veteran money quarterbacks, that they will keep it on the low end, which, again, also seems like a weird thing to just kind of admit randomly, because, again, you got to kind of play the game a little bit as both a head coach and part of a front office and also a representative of such. But, hey, different strokes, different folks. I'm just some guy talking in front of a microphone.
I think it's admission that we screwed up twice already, and we can't do it again. That's the problem.
Yeah, that's probably it.
I mean, that's a fact. That's not my opinion. They've been wandering around the quarterback position for 2 or 3 years now. So what he's saying is we're not going to make the same mistake. So we're not going to do anything. We're just going to punt and keep it like it is. So that's a franchise in peril. It's probably one that's going to get a new owner here soon. And so we'll see how it shakes out when new ownership comes in, and we'll see if they're okay with Sam Howell and not spending any money on a legitimate NFL quarterback.
And one last nugget I want to throw in here before we sign off is Adam Schefter dropped this mini bomb this week that the Arizona Cardinals, so where the Super Bowl is being played, don't plan to hire a head coach until after the Super Bowl. And if you read beyond the tea leaves, that could be seemingly indicating that a candidate they wish to hire is involved in this very Super Bowl, whether for the Chiefs side of things or the Eagles side of things. And we don't know who that is, Randy, because, again, it seems like they're going to wait. The Colts are the other team that are also waiting. We should know that in a couple of days, according to Jim Irsay. Any guesses on who it could be? Because actually there's a lot of viable names on both of these staffs that could make sense.
Well, I think the guy that comes to my mind is the offensive coordinator for the Eagles, Shane Steichen. But I think the Colts would like to have hold their beer as well, right? So they might want something to say about it. And neither team has hired anybody, as we know. And that search in itself in Indianapolis has taken a crazy route, in my opinion. So I think you're looking at 2 teams. Both are going to wait now till after the Super Bowl. But I think Shane Steichen's going to end up being a head coach sooner than later. And whether it's in Arizona or Indy, I think we'll know shortly thereafter next weekend.
All right, beautiful. Randy, a fantastic show for everyone watching and also listening on the podcast as well. We really appreciate it. And Randy, enjoy the Super Bowl and, of course, obviously the commercials, which is what everyone tunes in for every year as well. And then we'll officially be in off-season mode. It's off-season mode for 30 of the 32 teams. And, 2 others will join those ranks this weekend and get us ready for what should be a massive off-season. I'm looking forward to it. Thanks, Randy.
Thanks, Paul. We'll do it again soon.